Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today called Press Play, a conversation with Katy Smith. My name is Suzanne Leslie, and I am a curriculum and instruction specialist with Learner's Edge, and Katy will be joining us to have our conversation about play. That is myself you see on the screen. I am a proud mother of two daughters. I have a graduate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I have a senior at the University of Minnesota. And I, like Katy, am also a parent educator, but I've been with Learner's Edge now for 10 years. Just some housekeeping as we get started. I'd like you to make sure that you have good audio. So most of you will be listening on your computer, but if for some reason that method isn't clear, feel free to listen via the phone numbers you see there on your attendee panel on the screen. Also, during the webinar, we encourage you to send us questions throughout the presentation. You can use the questions panel on the the questions pane on the control panel. You can send your questions in at any time, and we will collect them and address them during the question and answer session at the end of today's presentation. And if for some reason we run out of time, we'll do our best to send you individualized responses after the webinar. And thank you again. Happy almost New Year, almost 2017. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce Katy Smith.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today,
You're
Katy.
welcome. Thanks for the invitation. It's so fun to be able to work with a cup of coffee in my own home and still in yoga pants and a soft sweatshirt. So thank you so much.
That's what we're all wearing right now.
Yay!
We all have coffee. We're all in our yoga pants and our soft sweatshirts.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Joining you today from Minnesota. We were just talking as we got started this morning about what a beautiful day it is. The sun is shining here. We have some nice white snow on the ground. And Katy joins us today from Winona, Minnesota. And for those of you who've never set foot in our beautiful land, Winona is a city nestled on the Mississippi River, and it is home to Winona State University as well as St. Mary's University, and world famous Blado's Bakery and a coffee shop called Mugby Junction.
And probably a surprise hit in a Shakespeare festival that would blow your socks off. So come for coffee and maple long john, which I will tell you is the best use of lard in the state of Minnesota. And then join us for a Shakespeare play in the summer. It's a really beautiful place to live and to work.
Wonderful. Well, Katy is a licensed parent educator, and beyond that, she was also the 2011 Teacher of the Year, which is quite an honor. And I'd like Katy to just share a little bit about what that was like for you.
Sure. So in 2010, I had been nominated for from my local as the Teacher of the Year, and went through the process of putting together a portfolio to submit to the State Teacher of the Year for Minnesota, mostly because I felt and still always feel a responsibility to the early childhood field, and feel like there's lots of folks who don't know what we do in early childhood programs, not only in my state, but in lots of other states. And so I was thrilled when I made the semifinals, and almost breathless when I made the top 10. But making the top 10 was a game changer for me, because I knew I would get an interview. And at that point in Minnesota, you sit with about 30 people and talk to them about your life and your work and your passions. And the time flew by, and I felt like I was teaching, interviewing, but also teaching, and helping people understand the importance of not only those first 5 years, but the role of parenting and communities to the responsibility of raising those young kids. And when I left the interview, I felt great about it, but I was certain that I was maybe in third, maybe fourth place, and hoping that I had changed the way people thought about early childhood. And then they announced my name at a banquet in front of hundreds of people, and I still get a little bit goosebumpy when I think about that day. And it was certainly a life changer. And since then have been traveling the state and talking with teachers and daycare providers and lots of parents about the culture of childhood and what kids need to succeed, and helping to inform a state and at sometimes a nation about the role of early childhood in school districts and the very particular role of parent education, which is new for a lot of states. Lots of states have early childhood programs, and so they have a frame of reference for that, but parent education is something that folks are very curious about and want to know a lot more about. So it was really thrilling, and it's a day that changed my life, that's for sure. It changed my work and made my classroom a whole lot bigger.
People wanted to sign up for your classes, sounds like.
Well, they wanted to, and then they wanted me to travel. So the year that you are you're the Minnesota Teacher of the Year, you do lots of traveling for your work, speaking to lots and lots of different people. But then the calls kept coming afterwards, because what I learned from that year is people are really hungry for really good parent education, and hungry for knowledge about those first 5 years in growth and development, in family life, and in a child's life. And it was kind of at just the right time. The whole world started talking about early childhood, it seemed like. Everybody was wondering about universal pre-K or preschools or 90% of a brain wiring before a child is 5. All those things were just catching steam. And so I felt like I was at the right place at the right time, and still feel like I am as I talk to policymakers and as states, Minnesota included, start to figure out what to do with kids in childcare, what to do with kids in preschool, so that we get the results, if I dare say that, but we get kids who are ready to learn and excited and curious about school when they get there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katy. Yeah,
Sure.
I think the parent education component is a curious thing, because as parents, there seems to be some, I guess, understanding that we should just know how to be a parent intrinsically. And it's wonderful that there are programs now that support parenting and help us figure out what we're doing, especially those 0 to 5 years.
For sure.
In your bio, Katy, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was, and in Minnesota, what we have is a universal access parent ed program, which I think folks think about parent ed as something you do when you feel like you're not parenting well. And I just like to remind people that on any given day, any parent, no matter their income level, their education level, their support level, can be an at-risk parent. Parenting is tough work and can kind of take the rug out of a lot of us with a little sleep deprivation or some colic or some not understanding what growth and development looks like.
Mm-hmm. I wish they had it for parents of 20-year-olds.
I know. Yep.
That's what I could use right now.
Yes. Well, we can talk after the webinar.
All right, sounds good. So in our conversations, Katy and my conversations, in her bio, she shared with me a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. You can see there on the screen. It says, "Do something every day that scares you." And I would just like to ask you, Katy, why you selected that quote, what that represents for you.
Well, today that represents a webinar, but I'll tell you, I love this quote, and I have for a lot of years, because I think for so many of us, educators and administrators and any professional, actually, if you wait until you feel like you're an expert, until you have all your facts together and all of the data and all of the research to start advocating for kids or families or whatever you're passionate about, you may never start. And so being in a place where you say difficult things or challenge someone's thinking or support something new, it feels scary. And so I love the idea of just getting comfortable with being a little scared. I actually feel like I'm fully alive when I'm a little bit scared, in a way that I don't when I just take on my life in the course and the rhythm that it is in naturally. And so at 56, you have to nudge yourself a little bit. And so I nudge myself with doing something a little out of the ordinary, or saying the hard things to folks, or advocating for kids in a way that feels fierce to me sometimes, because it feels like a good zone to find my passion.
Wonderful. I want to just talk for a moment about how Katy and I connected. In Minnesota, we have a conference called the Minnesota Education Association Conference, and it was held in St. Paul, and there were a number of different breakout sessions and workshops that were available, and one of them was called the Play Summit, and that was very intriguing to me with my background in early childhood education and as a former parent educator. So I decided to go to that workshop in the afternoon, and I went into the room and I found my place kind of up towards the front because that's what I've always done. And as I sat there and observed the other educators joining the room, I recognized that the room was set up for about, I don't know, maybe 50 people comfortably. And as I was sitting there, I recognized that people kept coming in, and all of a sudden now they were sitting on the floors, and some were sitting on the tables, and it was standing room only. And what that told me was that this was a topic that was resonating with educators wanting to know about play. Where was play going? What was happening with play? And so as a result, Katy and I connected, and that's why we have created this webinar for you today. One of the slides that you shared that day was a slide of a polar bear. And if you could just talk, Katy, a little bit about that MEA conference, and then obviously a little bit about the polar bear.
So my work takes me to lots of different school districts in the state and in other states as well. And when I have private conversations with teachers, I ask them, how are the kids? How are the kids doing in schools? And when I talk to big, large parenting groups, I let people know that I'm concerned about kids and ask people to raise their hands if that's what brought them there too. And 90% of the time, that's what people raise their hand about. And what I hear from people is that kids are really struggling. They're struggling in classrooms from the earliest ages with things like anxiety or sleep issues, behavior issues, regulation issues, sensory problems, and emotional dysregulation, or not being able to handle any disappointment of any kind. And so kids tell us they're struggling. And I love to think of myself as a teacher slash storyteller. And so I see this slide as a parallel to what's happening in classrooms. So at the Como Zoo in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I've been taking my family and can have early childhood memories of being there myself, I love the polar bear exhibit. And we usually visit in the summer when the zoo is open. It's open all year, but it's easier to visit in the summer. And I like to hang out and stand by that polar bear. And when I was little, I was fascinated. And now that I'm older and I watch him, I can watch him for just about 2 minutes before I start to feel really sad. Because when you see that polar bear, you see him on his platform, and he goes underwater and he touches the wall and he does a little twist and he swims back and he gets on that platform and he turns around and he gets back in the water and does a little twist and he touches the wall. And what you recognize after about 2 minutes is that he's doing a repetitive motion. He's doing the same thing. And if you step away and you go back 2 hours later, you recognize that, oh my heavens, he's doing the same thing. And what his behavior says to me is, I'm unhappy here. I am doing just what I have to do to survive this environment. And for me, that means I'm going to do the same thing over and over and over again. What I see in kindergarten classrooms and in preschool classrooms, first grade classrooms, second grade classrooms, and what teachers are reporting to me is kids are struggling as well in places that they don't feel like they belong in. I'm worried that play might be the reason that kids' behaviors are the way that they are, that we're having the kinds of struggles that we are in early childhood like we've never seen before. I mean, we're talking about preschool suspensions now with kids in 4-year-old kids, because what we've set up for them is a polar bear exhibit, a place where they just don't fit. It's too hard for them. It's too much for them. It's too rigorous for them, for lack of a better word, just at this minute. And so kids won't do repetitive motions, but their behavior speaks just as loudly as that polar bear. And what they're saying is, I don't fit here. And so that's the way that I can tell a story, because most people can identify with that polar bear. Most Minnesotans can, and I think other folks around the country know what it feels like now. And while we're having a national conversation about zoos and their role and their place for us anymore. And so it's just a way to tell a story about kids being uncomfortable in a setting.
Yes, absolutely. It's heartbreaking. I remember sitting in the
Yeah.
conference that day and listening to you tell that story and really connecting with the emotional part of that,
Yeah.
of seeing that polar bear and feeling the same way at the zoo. And thank you for making that connection between play
Sure.
and the polar bear. It's very,
Yeah.
very telling. Also, we know that the research is saying that play is disappearing from the classroom. I'd like the audience to just, as we're talking here, to think about, and we'll actually do a poll here and find out what our audience thinks about whether or not play is disappearing from their classrooms. As you can see on the screen, audience members, the choices there are yes, no, or uncertain. And if you want to take a moment to just let us know if you are in agreement that play is disappearing from the classroom, and we'll continue to talk then about what that means and what we can do about it as we continue. The research is telling us that play has many positive effects on students, that it helps them. Oh, yeah, there it is.
Hey.
Thank you.
All right.
64% agree that it's, as you can see on the screen, that it's disappearing from the classroom. Some are saying no, that's great, that's a positive sign. And for those of you saying that you're uncertain, we're glad that you're here today to have this discussion and to listen about the things that we're seeing from others and to find out what we can do to be play advocates as we continue our conversation today. Thank you for your participation. Well, the research is telling us the importance of play. And if we look at the research, as we can see, that it has such an effect on our students. One of the things that I know we talked about in that conversation that we had at the conference that day was about Play-Doh, and that how Play-Doh is rigorous and the different things that it helps our students and our children learn. Will you talk a little bit about that, Katy?
I sure will. So I do lots of keynotes for childcare providers and early childhood professionals and parents, and every once in a while, the community that I'm in will have somebody distinguished introduce me. And on this particular day, at a district in Minnesota, there was a superintendent who was happy to be there, happy to see a humongous crowd of early childhood professionals to talk about play. And I always hope that they will stay, and not just introduce me, but stay and listen to what folks are saying about play and help them get an understanding about the current culture of play in classrooms. And so he and I were visiting just for a few minutes before he was to introduce me, and he said, I'm not sure about all this play in classrooms. And I understand his intent, and I understood where he was heading because I hear it often from administrators. And he said, I just don't understand why there needs to be Play-Doh in classrooms. And I love those opportunities because for me, it's about play, but it's also about being able to articulate the tools that we use as play tools in early childhood that actually lend themselves to academic success later in life. And so I said, oh, sir, can I just tell you for a minute about Play-Doh? And all over the state, how I'm hearing from kindergarten teachers that kids are lacking grasp skills. I mean, they just are having a really difficult time using pencils and pens and scissors because they just don't have the hand grip and the muscle strength that they used to. And I said, and the best tool for that is going to be Play-Doh. And when you give a kid Play-Doh and the opportunity to squish and to roll and to squeeze and to make something that requires them to use their hands, you're going to get a kid another year later who can hold a pencil easily. And that to me is the way that we start changing the conversation about play and not feeling embarrassed about it, or in that case, being a teacher in an early childhood program that actually puts the Play-Doh away because it feels like a toy. But what we do instead is find our voice to advocate for it as a measure of academic rigor is Play-Doh. Now that's difficult because Play-Doh skills are difficult to measure. You don't find them in a standard, but holding a pencil you do in first grade and in kindergarten. And kids are just not having those same skills. And so in all kinds of ways, I ask providers and practitioners of early childhood to think about the tools they use in their classroom that they might feel like are frivolous or playful or toys in ways that they lend themselves to academic success and the best student outcomes as kids head into kindergarten and first grade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a wonderful example of an opportunity to be a play advocate, yeah, and a wonderful example of how something like Play-Doh is actually a teaching tool and helping our students gain the developmental strength, in this case the pincer grip and the hand strength, yeah, to hold the scissors, like you said, or to use a pencil. Yeah. The research really does support play, as you can see on the screen. It helps our students learn cooperation, how to learn a wide variety of social and academic skills, how to get along with others, solve problems. The audience, I know you are out there and you can read that for yourself, but if we trust the research, it really does support the things that we are wanting our students to learn. And so as a result, we want to ensure that they are having those opportunities to play. So then it becomes the question, if the research does say that play is the foundation for learning, then why is play the first thing to go? What are your thoughts on that, Katy? Why do you think play is the first thing to go? What are you hearing and seeing in the classroom?
Right, so this is just prime real estate for me. So if I just keep talking without taking a breath and you need to cut in, I will completely understand. So I love this question, and I will tell you, if you ask me this question in another week, I'll have 3 different answers, because this is the kind of thing that rolls around in my head that I keep thinking about, that keeps growing and keeps changing and keeps evolving. And so for today, I think some of the things that I'm concerned about are, and part of it is they have unintended consequences and intended, but we are professionalizing the field of early childhood right now. So we have moved from thinking about it as babysitting to actually a professional field where teachers are licensed, where teachers are on a contract, where we're aligning it with our K-12 systems. And when we professionalize something, we have to be able to measure it. And so we think about assessments, we think about ratings, we think about aligned standards. And play, like love, is really difficult to measure. I love my husband, but if I had to prove it on a standard, it would be a difficult thing for me to do. We all know that play is important, but if we had to prove it on a standard, it becomes difficult to do. So professionalism is one of the reasons. I also think that we're very, very busy right now preparing children for adulthood, or for at least the next phase in life for them, which is readiness in kindergarten. And when you are busy preparing them for that, you introduce the tools and the structure and the routine of readiness, rather than enjoy just what it is to be 2 or to be 3 or to be 4, and to trust that those years lend themselves to readiness, that we don't have to move readiness down to them. We can let kids naturally move through those phases. So preparing kids for a future is the second. Parenting has also become a verb, and it's happened in my lifetime. I'm one of 9 kids, and I don't think my parents spent any time thinking or wondering about how well I was doing as a way to measure their own success as parents. It's not just a role anymore, it's a measurable verb. And we seem to be evaluating how we are doing as adults and how other people are doing as parents by our children's accomplishments. So we're happy to show our friends and family how well our kids count to 10. Or how well they can write their name when they're 3, or how much of the alphabet they know at 2. And we don't often brag about the real skill set that happens in those ages, like making amazing truck noises, or children who spend hours singing to their stuffed animals, because those are play-based instead of academic-based. And so parenting has become a verb, is my third thought. My fourth is when we buy childcare. So as we've moved from kids who are largely cared for by their parents in their homes to kids who largely are cared for by adults outside of their homes, in daycare homes, in childcare centers, in preschools, when we buy it, when we pay money for it, we want a product. And so it's things like we want our kids to be able to be ready for school is one of the things that we buy when we send our kids to childcare. So we want ABCs, we want numbers, we want art projects. And then, so that's my 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth or fifth. And then finally, screens, I think, are impacting play. And I know we're going to talk about that in a bit. But screens on all kinds of ways, but how they draw us indoors, how they keep us from the work of play. And with screens comes fears, and with fear comes a need for parents to feel like they need to keep their kids safe. And so to keep them safe is to keep them close, which gets in the way of kids having real play experiences. So today, those are my big ones. And I'm sure you can add 4 or 5 that I wasn't thinking of this morning. And like I said, I'll have 5 more. But I'm fascinated with this because all of us know innately that it is good and it is right and it is inherent in children. But the folks that I talk to who are teaching in early childhood classrooms say, but I don't have room or time for my housekeeping center anymore, or we had to take the easels out, or we just don't have the same kind of time on the playground that we used to. So that's the why for me today.
Well, those are some wonderful whys. Absolutely. The one that stands out the most to me from the 5 that you listed, Katy, is that parenting has become a verb.
Yeah.
I think that's really thought-provoking and something that we all need to think about. And and then also the one where you said we're buying, childcare, and so we expect to get something in return. And in your examples of having our children know the ABCs or to bring home an art project, we're not seeing as much as a free play as we have been in the past.
Right.
Wonderful point. Yeah, and we will talk some more about screen time in just a moment. Okay. And up on the screen, there's a slide talking about how we are asking our students, our children, to do things that they're not yet ready for. And then also coupled with that is we are asking them to do things beyond their developmental level, and then we're taking away the thing that they need the most to relieve their stress, and that is play. So that's obviously a big concern for all of us as educators. Moving on from there, I have a slide here of a child missing a tooth, and I recall you used a similar slide in your presentation before. Could you talk a bit about what you're illustrating with that slide?
I do. And so one of the distinct privileges I have as being a Teacher of the Year in Minnesota is I have the opportunity to visit with policymakers often. And for such a long time, I was trying to figure out how to articulate my concern about talking about the achievement gap and the opportunity gap when it'll be obvious to all of us that there's a gap when we ask kids to do things that are not appropriate for them. And so I wrap my head around that and think about it, and I've come up with this. If I was a 4-year-old, not a 4-year-old, if I was a teacher of a 4-year-old preschool and had 10 kids in my classroom, which would be ideal and lovely, by the way. And on that second day in October, Suzanne, you lost a tooth. We are going to go nuts about that in the classroom that day. I mean, seriously, we're going to watch your tooth bleed. Everyone's going to want to see that Kleenex with blood on it. I'm going to hold the tooth in the palm of my hand. Kids are going to want to touch it. I might put it on the wall with clear tape so kids can get up close and personal with that tooth. You're going to be the star of the show for about 2 days. They're going to want to know what happened, what it looks like, what it tastes like, what it feels like, because this is not typical in a 4-year-old classroom. That's that one of their peers loses a tooth. This is a really big darn deal. My circle time the next day is something different than what I had planned. We're going to talk about teeth, and we're going to talk about growing, and maybe talk about bones and a tooth fairy perhaps. But it's going to be a changer, a game changer in the classroom. If I happen to talk in the teacher's lounge about it, and my principal might be in the teacher's lounge as well, and my principal says to me, "So Suzanne lost a tooth." And I say, "Yes, oh my goodness, it was remarkable. We're still talking about it 2 days later." If my principal says to me, "You have 9 other kids, and if Suzanne can lose a tooth, why don't you see if everyone in your class can lose a tooth this school year?" Well, now that's become a standard. And it changes not only those 2 days that Suzanne lost a tooth, but it changes the rest of my morning meetings, because now my morning meetings include, please open your mouth, children. Miss Katie's going to put my fingers in and try to move that tooth of yours, whichever one I think I might have the best chance of getting loose over the course of the school year. And I'm going to wiggle, 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 wiggle. And 4-year-olds are really sweet. They love their teachers. And so the first week, they're going to open their mouths quite willingly. But the second week, they're going to feel a little uncomfortable about that. Nothing's happening and they feel like they can't give me what I want. And so they might put their hands over their mouth, or they might tuck their heads into their laps. Some of them at home might be saying they don't want to come to school anymore because Miss Katie just keeps wiggling my teeth. And I'm not ready. It's not moving. They're not moving anywhere. And I can't do it. And I would hate the thought of that lesson plan having children really figure out that they just can't do it, or they're not ready for it, or they're not strong enough for it, or they're not smart enough for it. But I'm going to wiggle, 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 wiggle all year. And I might get another tooth out of a head because I have wiggled so diligently through the course of the school year. But I'll tell you what, I have for sure ruined the roots of those teeth because I've asked it to give up something it's not ready to give up, that mouth and those roots. And that seems bizarre, and people don't like that story and feel like, oh, that would be a terrible thing to do. Why would you waste your time with that? And still, it's what I say we do with things like reading in kindergarten. We ask kids to know letter sounds, and we ask kids to know, identify letters at a point that they're just not ready for it, where if we just would wait, all of those teeth would be loose and all of those kids would naturally come to reading in a way that bridges that achievement gap far better than creating it by creating some anxiety about what kids can't do on their way to that developmental milestone. And so I often feel like what we do now in early childhood classrooms, and when I think about early childhood, I think about through 2nd grade, is we develop classrooms where kids just don't fit, like those polar bears, and ask them to do things that they're just not ready for, like give up a tooth.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, our students, our children definitely develop at different rates. That's a lot of D's in a row. But they're all developing at different rates at the same time. And so to ask, in your illustration, to ask our students to all lose their teeth at the same time, it's a perfect illustration of how that just doesn't work. Because
and can I tell you that in no other time in childhood is it more obvious, or is it more fluid, development more fluid than in early childhood. And so much of what they're doing is on their developmental map and not on a lesson plan. So what I think our responsibility is to create a space where they can move and grow and become curious and feel solid about their learning, but also recognizes that everybody's at a different place and that it's okay, because actually it really is.
Right. It reminds me of my own daughter having some struggles in school. I think it was about 1st or 2nd grade. And her coming home with, saying, I don't want to go to school tomorrow, Mom. And she was such a child that loved school, and so I knew something was up. And then after doing some investigating, finding out that there were some of those kind of things going on where teachers were having some struggles with the different developmental things. And one teacher wonderfully said to me, reading doesn't matter. None of this is going to matter if she doesn't have the self-esteem she needs to get through life, right? And so you have to have that foundational piece long before the academic piece comes along. Right. Wonderful. There's other pressures on teachers as well, and you can see on the screen there, some teachers have commented that if play is happening in their classroom, that they're looked down upon. Some have been told that their students should be in their seats doing pencil and paper work to prepare for 1st grade, feeling pressures from administrators, perhaps. The one example there that says, you are going to stop singing and start teaching, right? And so really learning what play looks like and how that can be used in the classroom for those early childhood and, like you said, up to 2nd grade and even beyond. And we're going to talk a bit about what we do to play even as adults and how we model that to our children and students as well.
Yeah. And for me, it's interesting to see what's happening in early childhood then compared to what's happening in upper elementary and middle school, where you see lots of folks rethinking maker spaces and creativity stations and giving kids that time to be creative and to actually play with materials as a way for them to become academically stronger. It's almost counterintuitive then to take play out of early childhood and try to put it in later to see if we can catch up. Now that we know that kids can read as, you know, a sixth grader, then now maybe we should let them play a bit and use that critical thinking part of their brain, when I think it's already embedded in early childhood programs if we just become more comfortable and more competent and confident in talking about its assets to the whole journey of academic preparedness and academic success.
Yeah, and how we market play. I know we had talked
Yes.
about that.
Yeah.
And on this slide too, we talk about calling play centers developmental centers, or
Yeah.
describing it as active learning. And then as you can
Right.
see at the bottom of the slide, that play project learning all year. Just like how we explain play to others, and like I said, how we market play to others has a
Yeah.
strong effect on how it's
Right.
received.
Right. And you know, but even when you think about it, every 3 year old I know is a STEM learner. So STEM is creativity about how, and curiosity about how things work and how things put together and what I can and how I make sense of that, is using STEM skills as a sixth grader, but that's inherent in a child who is playing when they're 3.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit now about some other aspects of play, and how it manifests itself later in life. There's a book here on the screen called A Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink. And in his book, he talks about the importance of play and creativity, and that as we move into the future, that the different careers that we're going to be seeing are going to be things that can't be outsourced. And so he's really become a proponent of innovation and creativity, and how that can't necessarily always be, like you were saying earlier, measured, but how marketable those skills will be: writers, artists, all those types of things. So he's a wonderful author, and he's very thought-provoking. So for those of you in the audience, if you're looking for other resources that support play and how it comes along later in life and how it affects our lifestyles, we do recommend that book as a resource for you. Also, if you look at different businesses and companies right now, how they're beginning to recognize the importance of play. This is a slide, a picture of the Google campus, which is in Mountain View, California. And you can see right there in the center of the slide, in the center of the slide is a slide, because they're recognizing that innovation and creativity doesn't happen from 9 to 5 necessarily, and it happens, you know, by doing things that, there's a quote that says, what our brains are doing when they're doing nothing is actually very important, because they're actually doing something. So sometimes we need to rest, and we need to play, and we need to think outside the box when we're at work, and have opportunities to do different things besides just sitting at our desk or having meetings and so on. So that's another piece of it.
I love this slide. I have daughters in their late 20s and early 30s, and it's interesting to hear what their employers say to them about the number of hours that they need to work, how they need to take care of themselves, how they could commute from home, how they need to take a lap and get outside and get some fresh air. And so I think businesses certainly are recognizing that, you know, sitting at a desk for all that time just doesn't get creativity out of employees. I loved it. I look at sometimes a classroom, even a kindergarten classroom full of desks, and I think, I don't want to work there. It doesn't look engaging. In our own spaces, most of us, if we were to design our own classroom spaces or our own workspaces, we would have things to do and fun things to motivate us, and music and color and light, in a way that says, come in, enjoy, and get creative and have fun and bring your curiosity. So thinking about play as much as we do or don't, even as adults, is worth thinking about how to embed it in childhood so that they're comfortable with it and bring it on into adulthood. Look at that. Wouldn't you love to play ping pong at work?
Yeah.
Ping pong and parent ed.
Right. We're definitely
Yep.
evolving. I love seeing that. Yeah, I love this slide. I love the fact that
Yep.
we're recognizing that our ideas are coming to us not when we're, like we said before, not when we're sitting at a desk necessarily or in front of our
Right.
computers, but when we're out and about and we're doing things with others and sharing. And there's the quote that I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
whatever the brain is doing while apparently doing nothing may actually be
Yeah.
profoundly important. Last week I was listening to a radio broadcast where they were talking about the importance of rest as well, and about how our brains, during the nighttime while we're sleeping, our brains are figuring things out that we have not yet reconciled. And so that the important piece of resting goes right along with play as well.
And it's no wonder that a lot of us have colleagues and friends who tell us that they had the best idea in the shower, or they went outside for a walk and wished that they had had paper and pencil with them because they thought about this thing and they got out and it really came to them in a way that doesn't when you're sitting at a desk. And so for most of us, we understand that when you're doing nothing, it actually gives your brain the time to get creative and to grow in it. And yes, and so
Absolutely.
look at now our next slide is about a screen. And so this is fascinating to me because I don't know that we give our brains that time to do nothing anymore. I mean, I really am worried about this. So it is for me when I'm out I can be in a half a mile out in the woods, in the bluffs, and I do my best lesson planning there. I figure out all my relationships in the woods. And now I have to, because I love my screen as much as anyone, leave my screen at home. I take an old school iPod with me because I find myself so distracted by it. And me with some impulse control problems, but certainly the self-regulation to leave it behind. I worry about screens and kids and play. And so asking a kid to go outside, as most of our parents did, I mean, do you remember that? Just like if you walked into your house and said, oh, I'm bored, I don't know about you, but my parents would have said, you're bored? Really? Do you want me to tell you what to do? And we hightailed it fast out of our houses and found something to do with a neighborhood kid or out in the woods because we were going to be doing chores if we stayed in. And now there's really no motivation to get away from a screen and go out there and to check out the world and to develop friendships through play, to interact with the natural world. So screen time needs to be I think needs to be a concern for all of us. The last data we got about kids and screens was in 2010. I love the Kaiser Family Foundation. They were just the champions for kids and media use for years and years, and then I'm assuming found it more and more difficult to capture when screens became mobile devices. So it's easy to report in, 1997, how many hours your kid sits in front of the television, knowing that that was the only screen they were going to get. And now in 2016, it's impossible to know, even for you and I, if we were to measure every minute we were on a screen, because screens are everywhere. When I fill up my gas tank, there's a screen to keep me occupied, I guess, because the 3 minutes it takes to fill up my tank, I'm assuming they think I'm going to need some advertising, or billboards are moving. There's screens in cars, there's screens in the palms of our hands. And so we don't have that same kind of time that we did to be creative and to get kind of bored enough to get playful. And so I'm guessing, and if we're right, those of us who love early childhood and love the brain development that comes with it, that this will be the major competition to a playful brain. And I'm real concerned about the amount of time kids use. So Kaiser Family Foundation in 2010 reported that kids 8 and under were spending 7 hours and 38 minutes a day in front of a screen. And kids who were older than that, 14 to 18, were up to 10 hours and 45 minutes because they were interacting with more than one screen at a time. And so when you subtract sleep and school from that, and knowing that some of that screen time happens when you're at school, then we're kind of in a dangerous spot of not having much time to just be, or for play, or for reading, or for connecting with your family, those kinds of things. And then homework on top of it. We're having this national debate now as well about the value of homework. And so kids' time is is more precious than it's ever been. And my concern is if they don't have time for play, what we're going to see is far more mental health and anxiety issues and behavior issues than we've ever seen before.
Mm-hmm. Funny, when you were talking, Katy, what was going through my head was exactly the gas station example.
Yes.
Having stopped at the gas station and you have the screen going on, and then there's music playing, and there's all this stimulation, and being of the older generation, maybe I'm not as prepared to handle that as some of the younger generation is. They have the capacity to handle some of that. It seems better than I do, but
right.
Those are all interesting points, and it does take away from play. I mean, that's a shocking statistic, 7 hours and 38 minutes, and then the 10-hour statistic that you followed up with.
Right.
Absolutely, that's very challenging, especially challenging for teachers in the classroom trying to manage that.
For sure. And I was curious to see what the American Association of Pediatric Doctors did this year. I knew that they were going to take a look at their guidelines again. So for the last 10 years, it has been no screen time for kids under 2. And that was harsh for people. And I think a lot of people did their very best, but couldn't imagine how to get a shower in without putting a baby in front of a TV. But it was good. I think a lot of people knew it. It was well advertised, well publicized that no screens for kids under 2. And then screens became mobile. And then you could visit your grandma on FaceTime. And so it became a whole different conundrum for them. So where they ended up now is screen time for kids, limited, very limited for little kids, is okay if it's relational. And so if it is to visit with your grandma so she can read you a story because she lives in Seattle and you live in Minneapolis, that's one thing. Or if it is your mom sitting on your mom's lap and looking at vacation pictures on your phone from last summer and you're building a relationship through it, they've started to kind of navigate that terrain. And so it's going to be looser for people. And you and I'm imagining everyone else who's on with us this morning has seen kids in restaurants, tiny kids, with, instead of learning about water and menus and waitresses and waiters and maitre d's and all that rich vocabulary that comes from being at a restaurant, are seeing kids on screens younger and younger. And in fact, some of our national restaurant chains are just giving kids a screen as they check in so that parents apparently don't have to deal with the hassle of it, or kind of are outsourcing their responsibility, their teaching responsibilities to a screen instead of having those rich conversations themselves. So that's happening while we're having a new national conversation about the number of words that kids need to hear in their first year, being the best predictor of a third grade reading level. And so we want to make sure that we are more than mindful, maybe even pleasantly bossy about the way that we talk to families about screens and doing our best to protect them. And then I'd love a national grant that says every kid gets their own iPad with some limits and some filters on it, but by third grade. But let's make sure the kids are reading well on print and with paper, moving those fine motors, those gross motor muscles, and working their eyes before we get them on a screen. So particularly with reading, I think all the research is just compelling about it needs to be on print and on your lap, because you wire a child for reading, a love of reading, on your lap, not an app. So screens and me are going to duke it out for the rest of my life, I guess.
Yeah, they're not going anywhere. So like you said, it is
absolutely
navigating not. And putting the parameters and setting boundaries, and like you said, the relational piece of it are all extremely important points. Thank you for bringing those up. Briefly, we're going to talk about the obesity epidemic, just some statistics there from the CDC. The CDC is saying that 12.7 million children right now have been diagnosed as obese, and that 1 in 6, that breaks down to 1 in 6 children. So again, another motivation, another point about the importance of movement and play and activity, and again, how that screen time is stealing that as well. Looking at nutrition, how our nutrition is stealing that away from our children and us too. Always fighting that, going into the gas station again and getting gas and paying for gas, and would you like a donut on your way out? So all those different things are all coming into play as well.
And can I tell you that there's no better learning lab for resilience than kids at play. I mean, kids will take on really tough challenges when they're playing because they love playing so much. They'll stick with it long after they would stick with anything else because they're so motivated to stay in a play space. It really is how you breed resilience for kids. And so when I look at that obesity rate, I think about kids on the monkey bars, right? And kids who won't want to try to get all the way across anymore because it's hard, and it really is. My goodness, if you want to just get a humbling experience today, go on the monkey bars and try to get from one end to the other without your feet touching the ground. Do you know what I mean? So, but as
I
kids,
don't think I'd be doing that.
I know, but for kids, they want to do it because it's a challenge and it's playful, and they fall and they get up and they fall and they get up. But now, because they don't have the same kind of outdoor play experiences, they don't even want to feel that vulnerable. And so I see kids on the playground who won't try it a second time. They get up, they fall off, they say, and they move away. And they don't want to try it again. Where if they have a lot of early childhood experiences with those kind of materials and getting comfortable with falling and failing, those are all of the skills, that resilience and grit skills that we look for when kids sit down to take a difficult test like the MCAs. And so play really is a great place for kids to build some academic rigor.
Absolutely. Talking briefly about, like we were saying earlier about our generation, and I'm in my 50s as well, and other teachers that may be listening today, that we need to remember to play, and we need to demonstrate and model play to our students, and to do it for ourselves and to let our brains rest. Many now have grown up with organized sports, and not to say that there's anything wrong with organized sports, but some of the research is showing that the benefits of play are that it's free play and that it's not organized by adults and that it's organized by the children. So it's going outside into the neighborhood, if you can find other neighborhood children that want to come outside and play with you, and making up the rules as you go along, and learning that if I don't share the ball, or if I don't play the game with my friends, and if I don't cooperate, I'm not going to have any friends to play with. And that's that big learning piece there. So the slide here is that we need to remember to teach ourselves to play too. And just wanting to end and wrap up now briefly here on a positive note, we want to just talk a little bit about the things that we can do and some resources for you. Earlier, Katie, you talked about screen time and media, and we do, on the resource page that we'll show you in a moment, we do have a movie that you put together with Dr. David Walsh that talks about screen time. And so if any of you out in the audience are looking to watch something that's very informative about screen time, be sure and check that resources page. So become a play warrior and be an advocate for play, and that's what we want to make sure that we leave you with today, is to let you know what you can do. And you need to learn about play, and we have some resources on this page. One book is called Play, The Foundation for Learning, and that's by Lisa Murphy. You can see on the screen. And then the slide on the right, or the photograph on the right on this slide, shows a number of different books. This is an actual photograph that Katie sent us of her bookshelf of all the books that she has on play. And interestingly enough, the purple one on the left, A Moving Child as a Learning Child, is actually a book that we use in one of the courses that we offer here at Learner's Edge. So we will be sure and give you that information about that as well. What would you say, Katie?
I think the point about it is, if this is something you're passionate about, that just start building a library, because you're going to need to be practiced. So if you want to be a great piano player, you have to practice. And so reading about play is one of the ways that I feel like I practice it and become more comfortable in being less scared about talking about it. And so this is just what's in my library for the stuff that some of my go-tos that I read over and over again. But just, there's great work now being done about play and brain science that we've never seen before. And so it's exciting and thrilling. And I I want people to feel like there are plenty of people out there. It's about knowing who they are, who's writing about it, who are your gurus, and in this wonderful time that we're living in with screens, to connect with those folks in a Twitter feed or Twitter chats or any other way that you can find those people to feel empowered to advocate for play in a whole different way. I think so all of us know the importance of it, but to advocate for it is a whole different thing. Most administrators have their licenses from a place from high school or middle school, and don't have roots in early childhood except their own roots when they were kids. And so sometimes supporting them and understanding that early childhood play looks messy and chaotic, and it's louder than probably anyone is comfortable with it being. And the outcomes look more relational than academic, but it's really good time spent.
Yes. We're going to take a few minutes for questions. So do you have time to stick around with us, Katie, to answer
Absolutely.
just a few questions? All right.
Yes.
We have a question from Holly, and Holly is asking, how do you tell parents who want more academics in pre-K about what play is?
So I love this, that self-regulation is twice the predictor of academic success than actual brain work that you do. And so self-regulation is what will, and if you can help parents understand what it is, those brain skills will carry a kid through elementary school, middle school, high school, and college with the skill set that they need to be abundant learners. But self-regulation has its roots in play, stopping, starting, dealing with disappointment, knowing when it's your turn, waiting for you to share your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions for an appropriate time. All of that wires best in play. And so if you can start talking about play as academic, which it really is, then I think parents come along for it. And then if parents are still struggling, I talk to them about what it's like to be asked for 8 hours a day to do something that you're just not naturally wired for. All of us would struggle with that. And so kids at early childhood are wired for play. And when they're in the space that they feel comfortable and competent and confident, they actually become curious learners. But if we tell them that that space is not okay, then we see behavior and learning problems later. That's kind of a grand statement, but I feel that confident about it.
Good. Good. Thank you for that question, Holly. And we have time for one more question. And this is a question about growing up. It says, when I was growing up, we went outside and played without adult supervision.
Yeah.
Now it seems kids don't do that. How can I encourage my students or my own children to go outside and just play?
So I'm surprised by that as well. Not the question, it's something that I'm observing in my world as well. And so I think that parenting in a 21st century world requires that we do some different prep work than our parents did. And so when new neighbors move in, it still makes sense to walk your kids over with a pan of brownies, by the way, and introduce them to that parent. And it kind of makes a contract between adults. These are my children. Please be mindful of them. Introduce me to yours and I'll be mindful as well. I do bring brownies, and I got to tell you, I bring them in my very best Pampered Chef Stone, because I want that parent to come back to my house with that pan so I have another opportunity to connect with them. But doing the work that we need to do in neighborhoods to help kids feel safe in it is, and that's a right of childhood. I feel like I have the same fears as any other adult raising kids in this world, but I'll tell you this, I feel like kids are much safer outdoors than they are online with the work that we need to do. So know your neighbors, know your friends, teach your kids the skills to be responsible for watching a clock, watching the sun, having them practice going around the block until until you feel comfortable with them going on their own, and teaching them that that kind of trust is a sacred thing that you give to them as a parent, but it's a wonderful thing, because I got to tell you, if you've seen a kid lately ride their bike too fast, too far away from their parent, and check out the look on their face, I get really excited about that. Like, they have found heaven. You know what I mean? They're on the edge, and they feel brave and powerful, and I don't feel like I have the right to take that from a kid. And so giving them the space that they need to play needs a little more work on my end, but I'm willing to do it.
Right. It's teaching children to trust themselves and to trust the boundaries. Yes, absolutely.
And isn't that a great life skill? I think so.
Yeah, Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one we still need.
Yes,
Our whole,
for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
For
For
sure.
those of you wanting to connect with Katy, our fabulous Katy Smith, you can connect with her on Twitter. You can see there KatyMN12, on Facebook, Katy Smith Winona, and then on her website, Katy Smith MN. And we also want to just reiterate that we have a whole resources page here that we're going to put up. And on the resources page, you'll see the video resource that I talked about. The facebook.com is the last one listed if you'd like to watch the information about videos and screen time. And everything else that we've put together is referenced there. We are recording this today, so if you'd like to share this presentation with administrators or with friends, colleagues, parents, to share the information that we've talked about today about play, this would be a great way for you to get the conversation started. And with that, we would like to thank all of you for joining us. We will have this on our website. For those of you that are registered today, we will email you when it is up and ready to go and ready to be shared. And we absolutely thank you for joining us. We know it's a busy time of year, and we want to wish you all a Happy New Year. And a special thank you to Katy Smith for joining us today and to sharing all of her information and resources with us. Thank you, Katy.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been so much fun. I appreciate the invitation. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.